You're listening to Drop It Like It's Pop.
Drop it like it's pop. I'm Georgie Stayches.
And I'm Vicken Karkukli. This is where two lovers of pop culture come together, unfiltered and unedited, to analyze the biggest stories, moments, and yes, controversies the world of pop has to offer, from our very special point of view as media professionals and international event experts.
I'm the PR specialist.
And I'm the journalist.
Join us as we agree to disagree and talk pop till we drop. Well, hello, Vicken Karkukli.
Hello, Georgie Stayches.
We're back.
We are back, and so we're back from outer space.
We were on a journey, not a ride, a journey.
No, which I believe is what people told Katy Perry when she came back.
I think
and so you're back from outer space.
Yeah, I mean, by being on our sabbatical, our unexpected sabbatical, I think we created space for other people.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look at all those podcasts around. So many more.
It was only fair that we created space for other people. But it is 2025. We are back for season 2 of Drop It Like It's Pop. And, well, this episode, it's fluid, let's just say. And I think, we're going to talk through perhaps a little bit about why we came to a sudden halt last year. And I think that will take us down some different paths as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a long hiatus, to say the least. So I'm very happy to see you again. Not that we haven't spoken on, if not a daily basis, very, very, very regularly through the year. But it's nice to be back in this space that we created together.
It is. And I mean, there's so much we've kind of missed over the last almost a year we've been on the sabbatical. From, Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni to Katy Perry, Gayle King, the P. Diddy trial. There's certainly a lot in pop culture. We've got Jeff Bezos and Laura Sanchez's upcoming wedding and the extravaganza of pop culture magnets that seem to be attaching themselves to that.
The Paris Olympics?
The Paris just to bring it back to a bit more seriousness. The Paris
Olympics. Well, it was pop culture.
It was pop culture.
Yeah, it was very pop culture, I think.
Well, the dancers nearly slid off the stage at the opening ceremony.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, it was raining.
But perhaps we'll first of all maybe address why we came to a sudden halt last year.
Yes.
That we were tracking along nicely, and then sometimes life gets in the way, and life got in the way. Well, life got in the way last year.
Yes, it certainly did. And I mean, it's been an interesting moment looking back at the podcast and the first season, remembering how it all came together and how it all stopped, and just still cherishing those moments that we spent together doing the podcast and having those conversations, which we felt were meaningful, which we were happy to share with the world, and for which we got very positive feedback. But at the same time, life was happening outside of the world of Drop It Like It's Pop. And so it was a time of great conversations, but at the same time interspersed with heartache and the difficulty of life.
Exactly. And yes. I didn't want to get emotional, but I probably will get emotional because behind the podcast last year, I was racing to the hospital when my dad was very sick.
Yes.
And after a very unexpected and incredibly traumatic 3 months, he passed away. And it's weird because, as you say, sort of, while we were doing this and sharing our stories and our insights, behind the scenes, I was battling one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. Um, my dad was my mentor and my best friend, and he was a huge pop culture influence on me. Um, and so we thought it was probably fitting to uh, spend this first episode back because I don't want it to be a downer. And he would be saying, "Oh, pet, don't cry, it's all fine." But talk about how, how big people can, I mean, obviously dads are big in our lives, but he was such a big influence in
Mm,
what we grew up with, music wise, TV wise. Movies, we probably had different tastes, and we used to always
hmm.
tease him about his music movies. He was a musician. He kind of, took up, sort of joined, well, created a band when he was, I don't know, about 60, and was still playing right up till the end. And when he was in hospital, we managed to get his banjo and his guitar in and have some sing-song. And so, it's amazing. Well, it's not amazing, but it's these things that sometimes I think pop culture and music and art that we don't realize actually the power of these things.
Yes,
And
and you
I
were
can
saying
remember,
some.
when he was really unwell and his life wasn't kind to his mind at the end, is probably the best way to put it. Um, but music brought him back. And I can remember having a sing along with him and mum to Mull of Kintyre, like completely random in the rehab, unit. Um, and nurses were walking in and we're like, join in the sing along. But it's, I think it just reinforces the power of these things around us that do form what we know as popular culture.
Yes, and you were talking absolutely. And for our listeners, our dear listeners, I want to say that your dad was a topic in our conversations from ever since I've known you, and I've known you for almost 20 years now. So I can absolutely say that yes, he was every step of the way part of your take on popular culture and what your tastes and what you liked and what you didn't like. And um, you said you didn't want this episode to be a downer. It won't be. It won't be because a tribute is never a downer. It's always an opportunity to. It's always an opportunity to remember, and it's always an opportunity to bring those moments that we kind of want to move away from because we don't want to take ourselves back to those places of feeling those things. But at the same time, paying a tribute is a beautiful thing. And not comparing, of course, but I lost my father-in-law a few weeks ago. And you were talking about music, and one of the last things that he had in while he was in palliative care at the hospital was music requests. So my husband would actually play him some very specific music. And even for the ceremony after he passed, he chose every single song that was played at the ceremony, including some that were like, we had no idea why he chose those songs, yet he chose them. And those songs were played, and it's not something that we questioned. But so we'll remember those songs for being randomly played at that ceremony.
Oh, absolutely. One of the songs we had for Dad's photo montage, well, we had Mull of Kintyre, but we had the Glen Campbell version because Dad liked folk and sort of country music. So we had the Glen Campbell version of Mull of Kintyre. And then we had Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles, which I know a lot of people have that song. But of course, then I went to a Pilates class, just a few months later. And of course, Here Comes the Sun comes on. Um,
Mhm.
Maybe we shouldn't have picked songs that you hear a lot in everyday life because there's, going to be certain triggers. And look, music was such a big part of Dad's life that um, I wanted live music at his, well, we called it, it wasn't a funeral, it was a celebration um, of his life. And in a very roundabout way, I randomly got a message. I run events, so sometimes we do get people cold approach us, and I randomly got this text from someone the day we had met with the funeral home and we'd gone and looked at the venue, which was his golf club, a gorgeous setting in suburban Melbourne, but it's a very bushy part. And so you look out onto trees and kangaroos, and I mean, it's very Australian. And got this random message from someone touting their services. And I thought, it was someone taking advantage of our situation. It was all very bizarre. I'd never heard from this person before. Anyway, spoke to them. They couldn't do it. It happened to be a guitarist. Like, it was just so random. They put me onto someone else. So I spoke to an agent and they said, yep, we've got some people in mind. I gave them a little criteria. And she came back and she said, look, the people we had in mind weren't available, but I've got someone else who would be great. Gave me their name. And we'd given sort of, we want a singer, guitarist that can sing, these certain songs. And she said, the people I had in mind aren't available, but here's the name of someone else who I think would be great. And I looked at the name and I said, they don't sing in a French band by any chance, do they? And she said, yes. And I had been dealing with this person and had booked them for one of our events, the Bastille Day French Festival. Like, just this all happened within a matter of like 2 hours. So here we are with this fantastic guitarist and singer who I had been working with for like a month beforehand, then turning up at my dad's celebration, and people loved the music. So we had live music. He played as people came in, he played as we left, and then obviously played through the sort of the wake. I mean, I hate that term, but the celebration of Dad's life. And people loved it. I mean, I saw my uncle going up and making requests, it's like, and I think this sounds so bizarre because obviously there's so many layers of why that day was incredibly hard. But the thing that I actually found the hardest is I wanted to tell Dad about it because I just know he would have loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And he would have said,
Yes.
oh my gosh, that was fantastic. That was great. Oh, I've never been to a party like that. I can just, and the one person who I knew would have loved it the most was the one
Mm-hmm.
person I couldn't actually tell.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to something that you raised about, you very casually mentioned in passing, I run events. I want to say something. I want to, because it's also one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, because we're putting our professional spin on life and pop culture and life sometimes interspersed. So that's one of the reasons why we're here. But at the same time, because, and I, again, not comparing, but as my father-in-law's health was deteriorating, we had to make some drastic decisions, some life-altering decisions that had us face some unforeseen circumstances. And had it not been for the skills that I'd learned in the workplace, running events internationally under so much pressure, I think it would have been a very different situation of dealing with everything that kind of came my way. Having to, because we were moving, I mean, well, maybe I should also say that I'm coming to you from France today because I am
You're
back
coming to
from
me from a
France.
kitchen.
That's right. So you know me from Louisville, Kentucky, season one listeners. But I am back in good old Clermont-Ferrand, France, which is the Michelin capital of the world. And so we were moving countries as all of that was happening. So that was an added layer. And had it not been for the skills, and we've spoken about this as well, that it kind of takes you out of the situation and kind of gives you the skills to approach things in a very matter-of-fact way. And I feel that it's been a blessing for me to actually be able to deal with life as it came my way in such a hectic way and kind of put a professional spin on it.
Mm. Oh, I event managed the hell out of Dad's celebration.
Oh, how you put it. Of
I've had
course.
requests. People have requested I could start up a new business. But like, and I'm just actually, as we're talking, I mean, most people's parents, not all, but I understand, but most people's parents are a huge influence from
Mm-hmm.
um, their pop culture and their tastes and what they like. And mum and dad certainly were. And I'm just thinking about, I gave the eulogy at at the celebration. And, I mean, it's interesting because Dad was really into music, like loved his music. As I said, he played guitar, so, self-taught. We joke he became a rock star at 60 sort of thing, made his own banjo, he'd played the mandolin, he played the banjo, he not only made the banjo, he played the banjo. Uh, but it's interesting because he's got three brothers and a sister. And the brothers, my aunt has passed, but his brothers can't remember music being a big influence in their life. And
Hmm.
so they don't actually know where this sort of love of his of music came from. But it was certainly strong. And when Mum and Dad were courting, um, in the early days, like Dad took her to the Rolling Stones at the Palais at this theatre in St Kilda. I mean, they went to Ray Charles, but Mum
Wow.
went to the Beatles. So
Oh, I remember that.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
and I sort of say, good on Dad. He took Mum and my aunt, so Mum's sister, to the Rolling Stones. So, you've got to work out, you've got to get in with the siblings. But, to
Hmm.
the Palais in St Kilda, I just think, gosh, Mum does sort of joke she fell asleep in Ray Charles. I'm not sure that one grabbed her as much. But, we'd always spend family holidays listening to music in the car and or audio cassettes of TV shows. I remember we had the audio cassette of Faulty Towers, and there's like 4 episodes of Faulty Towers. I could nearly recite off by heart the Faulty Towers show, Great British Show with Prunella Scales and John Cleese. Um,
Hmm.
because we listened to those episodes when we did a big family holiday in 81 or 82 up and down the east coast of Australia. So well, I remember we had a cassette, it was called The Frog Prince. And if anyone remembers this, I will be very impressed because no one else seemed to have it. But it was a Jim Henson, so it was Kermit, and it was sort of this fairy tale story called The Frog Prince. Cassette, we listened to that up and down, the coast of Australia. So all these influences from our parents and especially from Dad have played such a big part in who I am. And I think because Dad was always, he liked, Dad and I are both Leos, we like the limelight, we like the stage. So, he was very comfortable performing. And I think that's where I got my love of drama and performing arts from, and public speaking. If there was ever a family function, Dad was the MC. If there was ever, so Dad was very comfortable and loved public speaking. And I think that's where I got it from. I can remember being his assistant in his magic show at the church talent show.
Oh, wow. I had not heard of the magic show.
I remember he had this magic book. I remember there was like this wooden thing that you put a balloon in and then you stick skewers in, but it didn't pop the balloon. It was all very magical. So I certainly have taken a lot of those traits from Dad, and right up until the end, he was cracking jokes, and um, so yeah, so I thought this episode we could sort of talk about influences,
Yeah.
um, and I'd also be interested to talk about how pop culture can actually sort of be a refuge for us too. And there were certain TV shows that got me through the hell of last year, that were like a warm hug. Um,
Yes.
mm,
Yeah, absolutely. And you raise a good point with, I mean, the music component and the soundtrack component is such a huge part of our lives. I mean, we've been putting together soundtracks to our own podcast episodes. So there's something about music. I mean, I grew up listening to Armenian music and Greek music and Arabic music because that's what my parents listened to in the house. And then, you as you go along and you meet new people, I mean, you get all those influences and yeah, that kind of creates the soundtrack to your life. And that's what I feel people have been. There's something to be said about loyalty as well, because some of these artists who have endured for the past 50, some of them 60 years, um, it's also very much because they've been the soundtrack to so many people's lives, whether you're a hardcore fan or not.
oh, absolutely. And I can remember growing up, there were four artists we listened to in the car because would take a lot of family holidays with the caravan. So we'd be on long, 10-hour drives, 3-day drives, whatever it was. So we listened to a lot of music. And this is it, Peter Allen, so very well-known Australian singer. Uh, the boy from Oz, people might know him from. So Peter
Right.
Allen, Elton John,
Mm-hmm.
Billy Joel, and Barry Manilow. And
Oh, wow.
Barry Manilow was mum. And and we would
Uh-huh.
always tease mum about Barry Manilow, and to
Is she
her
still a
credit, I mean,
Panelo?
when I think back, I think, gosh, we were mean as kids. But we would always tease her about Barry Manilow. Barry Manilow is such an easy target, is the joke. But then Barry
Mm,
Manilow toured when I was in uni. So what's that, like 94, 95? And I said to mum, come on, we must go, because it was when Barry Manilow kind of became a bit of a cult figure again. And she's like,
right.
seriously, you've teased me about Barry Manilow for all these years. But and we had so much fun at his concert. But even though, we teased her, he's part of my childhood, listening to those
So,
songs and that Australian landscape. So whenever I
mhm,
hear these sort of four, there's a couple of others in there, but they were the four main ones. And then
right.
obviously the Beatles, and then, Dad was into the Travelling Wilburys, and I remember Jive Bunny, which I couldn't stand. Do you remember Jive Bunny? No,
Yeah, I
yes, Mum
do
and Dad
remember
loves
them.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you say you're a Fanalo now or not really?
Wow, no, I would say. I mean, look, I think his songs are very good. Who
Yeah.
doesn't like Mandy? Um,
Oh, of
oh,
course. Love Mandy.
yeah. Uh, so yes, and then so that, music wise, and as I said, obviously the Beatles and some Australian acts in there. Billy Fields, Bad Habits, we used to listen to a bit. But then TV, Dad and Mum and Dad, and I don't know where Dad got this from, um, but very much the English humour. So, we grew up on the Two Ronnies, Porridge, Open All Hours, um, Mind Your Language, which we've talked about, that has its own issues and challenges.
Mm-hmm.
But Love Thy Neighbour, once again, one that would never be repeated these days. But very much that English humour. Not Benny Hill. He wasn't a Benny Hill person. But obviously we watched American shows as teens, but very much that English, Mum was very much into English shows too. So we were very much brought up on a diet of sort of what would be the BBC, but in Australia it'd be the ABC.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting how, I mean, one thing I took away also from my father-in-law's funeral was we're talking about the influences that people have on us, but it's also an opportunity to realize the influence the what people we are so close to have on other people that we don't know. You know what I mean? And those people, either coming to you or speaking, let's say at a celebration or a funeral or a wake, whatever you want to call it, it kind of gives you a new perspective as well on the person that you thought you knew and kind of found out things about. So God knows I found out a lot of things about my father-in-law during that ceremony. And it was it was a beautiful moment for me of discovering these things that even his own son didn't know. So that
Mm.
was that was quite a moment. I feel that how what I want to know is all those how what take do you have on all of that music and all the body of work that represents the influence that your dad has had on you in terms of pop culture. What is your take on that today?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean,
And listeners, it's 7:30 a.m. in the morning here, so my
and
brain is still
and
waking up.
it's 11:30 p.m. in France, and I'm a bit under the weather. Now, what I want to know is is it specifically attached to specific memories, or is it just kind of something
Mm,
that, you know, is
yeah,
part of a larger woven piece of what
yes.
you consider your upbringing and the popular
I
culture
think
that you
a
know
lot,
and love.
yeah. No, I know. Okay. I think just a larger piece
Mm-hmm.
there. Look, and I mean, Mum and Dad. So they both, and I talked about this in Dad's eulogy, that Mum and Dad are very. Mum still is, but Dad, obviously, I'll talk about in the past. We're very good at creating moments.
Oh.
Um, and magic moments. And I don't think they ever meant to. Like it wasn't really sort of orchestrated or contrived. But here's an example. So Peter Allen has a song, Tenterfield Saddler, which is a beautiful song for anyone who hasn't listened to it, about his grandfather in a town called Tenterfield in Australia. And so I can remember on one of our big family trips is going to Tenterfield and Mum making Dad sort of, drive. We got to the sort of one end of the main street, queuing the tape up, and we drove through Tenterfield playing Tenterfield Saddler on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it's just, I can remember it just moments. So I think Mum and Dad have always been very good at creating those really magic moments. And living life to the fullest. So, and I'll give you two, Mum's always the first one up dancing, whether it's at a concert, at a stage show where the audience get up, no one else even needs to be up, and Mum will go, come on, get up. At a wedding, Mum was the first up, is the first up. She's never been sort of, well, wait until a few others get up. She just lives life to the fullest.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad was the same. And Dad had a very, he had an amazing way with words. So he was an amazing writer, very creative. And so he could do little ditties. He could rewrite songs, not notes wise, but lyrics wise. He could write funny stories. And there's a radio program and a group in Australia, particularly in Victoria, called the Could Have Been Champions. And so they talk about sport, and they do satire of songs. So well-known songs, and then they rewrite the lyrics to be a satire about a football team or something like that. And so Dad, a lot of people listen to them. One of the guys in the group is Greg Champion, and Dad just wrote to Greg Champion one day with a song suggestion. And I can remember sitting next to Dad, because Dad and I shared an office for some time. And when Greg Champion rang him, and then Dad and Greg Champion became pals and would jam together. And that was just, Dad had no sort of qualms in just emailing, going, oh, hey, I've got an idea. He didn't know this person. And suddenly, he's mates with these musos on the radio and having jams with them. And I
Right.
just love that, he'd have an idea and he'd suggest it, not in a kind of a, long time listener, first time caller kind of way, but he had that creativity, and he was, he didn't have any qualms in just contacting someone that he didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I've left you speechless.
no, no, I find it very interesting because these are kind of standalone anecdotes, but they inform kind of a greater story. And what I was wondering, because we're talking about influence, which is something very personal, it's our own take. So if you don't mind me asking, because we're talking about things that we have spoken about, and there's many topics that are being mentioned here that are going to become episodes
Mm.
in the season that we're
Hmm.
starting. So this is season 2, and we've spoken about,
Are we dropping Easter eggs?
yeah. Well, I mean, we can absolutely be a little more kind of open and announce some of the topics, but we've spoken about these in the first season as well, and we've
Mm,
spoken about family, and we've spoken about friendship, and we've spoken about siblings, and you know what? There's also one that we have mentioned in passing in certain contexts, but the power of the speech. We haven't spoken
mm,
extensively about
mm.
the power of the speech. You were mentioning the eulogy, but we've also had very many conversations, you and I, about the power of a very good acceptance speech.
Yes.
So, I was thinking about all these as you were telling these anecdotes, which kind of what I was seeing a bigger picture. What I want to know, because I feel very strongly about this, because influences they can seem very mundane. It's just music, but they also, or it can be just music or television, but they actually shape who we are. They actually shape our take on the world. They open us up to the world. And what I want to know is, have you discovered, because you have a sister, And I have a sister. That's one thing we have in common. We're one of two siblings, and so we each have an elder sister. And I wanted to ask you, do you have the same take on, all the things that your father passed down to you with all the popular culture? Is it even a conversation that you've had, the memories and all those things?
I don't know whether it's a conversation we've had, but yes, it is. My sister probably has slightly different ones. So I probably was very with Dad on the country music kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, not that, he was listening to the country music awards or anything like that, but he certainly loved country music. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou was one of his favorite films. So this probably gives
Oh,
you an
nice.
insight into Dad's humor. He loved the music. I can remember we bought him the sheet music for Oh Brother, Where Art Thou. He loved the story. He loved the humor. So I was very much with Dad on sort of the country side of music. And that's actually just reminded me this is so, I mean, I just realized what a very understanding and supportive dad he was. Because when I was young, I used to make radio shows on my cassette player and pretend I was a DJ. And, you'd have your double cassette. So I would do a bit of an intro and then I'd play a song. And I would record it. And then I would give him the tapes and he would listen to them in the car. I mean, what a supportive person. So my son, I can imagine this 8-year-old kid's radio show that he listened to on the way to work. And I had a magazine called Chic. I had my own magazine called Chic, and Dad was a financial planner. He was the money advisor. Mum was the travel advisor because she loves travel. And I can't remember my sister, and they all had articles, and I would hound them because the deadline was coming up for my publication of Chic. And I found a copy of Chic recently.
I had no, I didn't know this.
Had
Why?
a launch party for Chic in my bedroom
Oh,
with my family. It was very.
oh,
Um,
wow.
but I must show you a copy because I did find an edition, a very
Yes, please.
rare edition of Chic.
And do you
Uh,
still have the cassettes of the radio show?
I know, God. Imagine if I did. God,
That would
that
be
look, who
amazing,
knows? At
though.
Mum and Dad's house, I probably would find them. Um,
Right?
so that
Yeah.
was very much so. Yeah, Dad, and I'll just tell you this because memories. Like I just when you think back on memories, I remember I took Dad to see Casey Chambers. So Casey Chambers is
Yeah.
Casey Chambers. Most people know Casey Chambers. And she was doing this show with her partner at the time, something Bones tour. I can remember, or something to do with anyway. And her dad played, and so it was at the Art Centre or the concert hall in Melbourne. And Dad had just been to Vietnam. Mum and Dad had just been to Vietnam on a conference. And Dad had had some because you'd get shoes made in Vietnam, and he'd had some cowboy boots made. I mean, they were completely wrong. They were too, the fabric bit that goes up your leg was too low, but they had quite a high heel, like cowboy boots do.
Right.
Anyway, so Dad and I are at Casey Chambers, and a friend of mine was also at Casey Chambers in another part. And so we were messaging back and forth. And my friend texted and said, "Do you want to meet at such a Transport, which is a bar in Melbourne? Do you want to meet at Transport after for a drink?" And I said to Dad, "Do you want to, we can go for a drink after. It's at Transport. It's a little bit, but, we'll have to walk there. It's a little bit of a walk." And he said, "Oh, not in these heels." Because he was just getting used to his cowboy boots.
Right? You got to break them
I can't
in. You
remember
got
a
to
lot
break it
about that.
in.
I remember a lot about the concert, but I remember that. And God, that made me laugh, not in these heels. And then I'll just tell you one, Dad and I always love going to the Melbourne Film Festival, and I love documentaries. So whenever I go to a film festival, I basically just hone in on the documentaries. And I had seen this one advertised, um, set in a guitar shop in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And there was no voiceover, there was no sort of setting the scene. It was just fly on the wall in this guitar shop. It was the most amazing documentary. And I can remember Dad came in, and this was, this was pre-COVID, but not a huge amount of time ago. And then my sister, his daughter, came and met us after for lunch. And Dad and I were speechless because the movie was unbelievable. It was about this
Mm-hmm.
guy who made guitars. It was the musos that came in, chatted. And we sat at lunch, and Melanie couldn't stop laughing because Dad and I just sat there speechless. We could not talk because we
Mm-hmm.
were just so stunned at the amazing documentary we'd stumbled across. And then I messaged them on Instagram and they messaged straight back. And I, showed Dad. And it's just those little moments that are built around that shared passion of
Right.
movies, music. So Dad and I very much sort of shared. I mean, we all shared the love of Elton John, and as a family, we went to Elton John a few times. And I very much shared that country. My sister shared the love of probably like Queen with Dad, Creedence, Clearwater Revival, which I mean both of us love. So she probably shared slightly different music with him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, going back to that documentary thing, I'm a firm believer in a moment of silence after seeing a film or something together. You got to let it sink in. You can't let the conversation happen immediately. If it's something powerful, you got to let it kind of hold its space for a
Yes.
moment and then, give it a bit of time.
Mm.
Yeah, that's something I feel very strong. Yeah, I don't speak for like 15 minutes after I've seen a film.
Oh, you're right. I've seen the two distinct. I mean, this is let's just park the tribute to Dad for a moment because this is not connected with that. But there were two films I remember seeing that had such an impact on me. Not impact as in they were life changing, but there were those movies that you walk out and go, oh. And one was Spotlight,
Yes.
um, and the other one was The Big Short,
Mm-hmm.
about the subprime real estate and, or, the financial betting against, shortening and betting against the markets, and then what the fallout was. And I remember both those films, I walked home from the cinema, which doesn't, I mean, I had caught the tram into the cinema. It's probably a 40-minute walk home, so it's not like I was walking for hours. But yeah, I just needed that space after those
Mm-hmm.
movies because I found them so powerful, um, for
Mm-hmm.
different reasons and not for good reasons. I mean, they were very good movies and very powerful, but the context and the content was incredibly distressing. And they had, thankfully I had both seen them on my own because I thought I couldn't talk with someone after this movie. I need to just go and be.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. And it doesn't even have to be, I mean, it can be a comedy as well. I find going to the movie, I mean, for me, going to the movies is, I enjoy going to the movies alone. Or,
Yes.
kind of, I have, they don't know about this, but I have friends that I refuse to go to the movies with anymore because they're too loud and they'll check their phones and all that
Oh,
stuff. I'm a firm believer in movie etiquette. And so, yes,
so I'm like you. I love going to the movies on my own. So here's my question: do you stay to the end of the credits?
usually I do.
Mm.
Yeah, usually I do. And there's, I mean, with them, I remember staying until the end for the Blair Witch Project because we were hoping that something else was going to happen at the end of the Spoiler alert. But yeah, nothing happened. And then it was the 12 a.m. showing that we went to. So by the time the movie ended, it was like, I don't know, it was so late that yeah, I remember that. Yeah, usually I do just because I kind of want to see everyone out before I leave the theater.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I always stay, but for a different reason. I always call the credits the cool down. So it's like
Oh
I'm in
yeah.
like because I go to the gym so often, not. But to
Yes.
me, it's the cool down in an exercise
Hmm.
class.
Yeah,
Mm.
no, that's a good point. That's
And
a
I
good
always want to see that no animals were harmed in the making of this film.
Can you I mean, it's little small letters, but yeah,
Well,
you
and
pay
especially when there's
attention.
no animals in the film and there's a line that says no
You know
animals were
what?
harmed, I'm
Sometimes
like,
there's no animals that you can think of or remember, but yet those though kind of that mention will be in the credits. So,
and I come, well, you and I both come from a media and production background. So
hmm
I think I want to give, like, I owe it to every little person, not every little person, they're not little people, but every person who played a role that, people just walk out. I want to acknowledge them. That sounds really, that sounds so, that's a stupid comment. I was going to use some words, but then I thought, gosh, they're Australian slang and they might not translate. That sounds a bit lofty of me. Oh, look at me, I'm giving them their moment. I just actually mean I think it's important to acknowledge
Yes.
all the players that made that film. And so I actually like to stay and look at all their names.
You know what? That makes sense to me. I mean, I've done some, work on documentary films and things like that. I was very excited to see my own name. So
Mm.
why wouldn't I want to see everyone? You know what I used to do? Because I mean, I'm wired that way. Because Armenian family names are so easy to identify because there's IAN at the end. I always try and spot the Armenians who worked on a film. That's the Armenian in me. That's what I do.
Well, it's interesting, when I was talking about Dad messaging the could have beens, I think he gave me the confidence to do that.
Hmm.
And I remember seeing Dior and I, an amazing documentary on Dior, when is it Raf Simons comes over as designer?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yes. And we saw it at the Melbourne International Film Festival, myself and my mum and sister and a friend. And I was so taken. Well, I was taken by the global communications director in it.
Hmm.
But the movie was amazing. And I thought, and this could be 12 years ago. I don't know. I'd have to look up actually how old that film is. But I was so taken with that film. And I think it got a standing ovation. I thought, I need to find these people. And so I Googled and I found a press list. I couldn't believe it. And the email for the global communications director for Dior. And I sent him an email and I said, I don't usually do this, but just wanted to let you know. I thought you might be interested that the film just, aired at the Melbourne Film Festival, and it got a standing ovation, and it was amazing. And thanks so much for, giving us all the opportunity. And he wrote straight back. And it wasn't kind of like, you could tell it wasn't an EA. It was like he just replied on his BlackBerry because it was in the days of
Right.
BlackBerries. And, I think when I am talking to you and reflecting, it's that confidence that Dad had to just, if you liked something, tell someone. Just contact them.
Yes.
Dad would be making relationships. Dad ran a fundraising concert at the Palais in St Kilda, where actually he saw the Rolling Stones. And he was connected with a very well-known actor in Australia who then had all these contacts. And I was overseas at the time, but he ran this huge fundraising concert with lots of musicians and talent. And Dad just had a way of doing that. He just could connect with people, and it didn't matter if he didn't know them. And not in a pushy way, but just, to even send a note and say, thank you, that was great. And so when I think back to that confidence to just email the head of
Hmm.
communications at Dior in France, what
Because
was I thinking? But I think he just gave me that appreciation of, if you like something, tell someone or tell
that's right.
them.
And working in communications and media, we realize absolutely the power of that. And I think social media has helped greatly in being able to approach people in a
Mm.
non-stalker way, but being able to approach people and kind of shout something out and say that you enjoyed something. And funny thing is, I bought a coffee table book the other day of pictures of how do you call those restaurants that are for people who drive trucks? We have specific restaurants in
Oh,
in
like
France.
roadhouses, kind of.
Is that, yeah, maybe something like
Truck
that. So
stops, roadhouses, yeah.
a French photographer came up with this beautiful book of pictures of these restaurants all around France. And I saw the book in a window of a bookshop and went in, bought it, and then I, kind of posted it on Instagram and said, "This is an amazing book." And he replied. He was like, "Thank you so much
Yeah.
for your kind words." And then we had a short conversation of me giving the context of why I like the book so much because I was in contact with so many of these restaurants in the regions that I worked in as a journalist. And he
Mm.
was like, well, it means even more considering you know the context. So it was super short. It was like 3 or 4 messages back and forth. But yes, I applaud your dad for encouraging you to do that
Yeah.
because how much do we kind of put barriers for ourselves in
Exactly.
expressing something which is only going to make the person in front of us or at the other end of the conversation feel good.
Well, that's it. And that's what I felt with the movie that, he might like to know in little old Australia,
Right. Yeah.
the complete opposite end of the world, that we're enjoying the movie. And the other thing, Dad was very much, he was very much about social justice. So,
Uh-huh.
and, he was very altruistic, was on lots of committees, very community minded. And I talked about this in his eulogy of, did that come from, he came from the country, so that sense of community was big to him. I mean, I remember Dad running, I don't want to say panel discussions, but discussion nights on refugees' rights in the 90s before it was, he spoke about things even if the rest of the world hadn't sort of got on, so he was really, I'm not going to say he was leading the way because people have been fighting for refugee rights for years, but Dad was very much when, he had a very strong sense of social justice, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And I've completely forgotten why I was talking about this. Oh no, that's right. So, he very much had this sense of social justice and this commitment to it. Um, and and I think it has definitely been instilled in me. And I remember the Daily Mail, which is a tabloid here. And when the Daily Mail decides they're going to go after someone, they really just focus on someone. And there was a period, and they're probably still doing it, where they were going after a certain TV presenter here for like just the most ridiculous things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and one Friday night, I was sitting at home and I was, scrolling and just watching this barrage that they were piling on this very well-known Australian TV presenter. And I thought, I'm just going to message her through Instagram. And I just messaged her and I said, I just want to say, I think you're amazing, and I can't, that I'm watching the abuse that you're being thrown by this media outlet, and I just think it's appalling. And you've been really open and you've shared your story, and I really appreciate that. And as a female leading, in the media industry, I think she is an inspiration. Uh, Anyway, she wrote back, and like your conversation with the photographer, this conversation back and forth on Instagram. She's probably got 1 million followers. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but I was so glad I did. And she said, "Thank you so much for your support." And it doesn't hurt if they don't want to respond; they won't respond. But
Right.
so that very much has come through as an influence from Dad as well.
That's yeah, that's great. I mean, the best thing we can do to honor um, the memory of someone is to carry on those things and
Yes,
kind of, pass them on
yes,
because you know what? Very briefly, my I realized that my father-in-law had taught so because we're talking about things where our podcast is about what we learn at work and the spin that we put on popular culture through work, but there's so much to be said also about what you do outside of work. And your dad did so much outside of
mm,
work,
mm,
and I feel that's also a very important thing to mention because my father-in-law retired in his 50s because he was in the military and he had a full-on second life after
yes,
that. And he was a
yeah,
beekeeper and he was a hunter as well. Think of it what you will, but there were so many people during the ceremony that kind of there yeah, there was a full-on speech about how much he was keen to share his experience with the younger generations, be
mm,
it as a hunter or be it as a beekeeper. And I feel that we always talk about professional skills, but there's also a whole other kind of aspect to life outside of work. And I feel that's a beautiful thing too.
absolutely. And
Hmm.
Dad, yeah, I mean, Dad, he was a doer, He always had to have projects on the go.
Right.
And he was always hungry for knowledge, and he came, he had very humble beginnings growing up in the country. Um, his brothers always joke he was too refined for the country. And and he needed to go to the city. So he moved to the city when he was 16. And so but I think, that country upbringing, and I have such an affinity with the country, and which has come through from Dad. But he was always a doer. He always had projects on the go. He had a lot of get up and go. And so he was a ham radio user, which is an amateur radio user. So, he loved electronics. So, and he was one of the first, and I'm talking about this because I think if Dad had been around, if he'd been well, and a bit younger during the podcast, Dad would have definitely had a podcast. So Dad was an early adopter for YouTube. So Dad was using YouTube way before any of us for how-to videos. He'd go there on how to build his banjo, how to put a piece of it together. Like when we were using YouTube to watch entertainment, he really was watching YouTube as tutorials. If he couldn't get a note, if he was trying to play a certain style of banjo, he'd go onto YouTube. So he was a really early adopter of all of those things. And as I said, from the ham radio, all of that, I really think, if Dad had been born even sort of 20 years later, and not to say the podcasts are restricted to age, it's probably just at the point in his life, he would have been really a good podcaster. And during COVID, I did some Sunday sessions with him. And they came about because I watched, Dad's health was, his memory was changing. We'll just put it like that. And I could see he wasn't perhaps being included in his band as much as he had been, which really infuriated me. So I took matters into my own hand. I said, well, I'm going to start a solo career for you. And so I would record some Zooms of him playing songs on the banjo. And, he, as I said, his memory was changing. So his musical ability was changing. But I would then put them out on Facebook and we'd have so much fun. And he loved it, and he could chat. And what was interesting, well, perhaps not interesting, was because he does like folk and that sort of, as I said, that oh brother, we're out thou kind of music. When you start to look at those lyrics in the light of today, you realize how inappropriate some of those really well-known songs are. So it took us a long time. We had to really kind of cut the list because songs that I said, we're in the mainstream, they were in, we all know them and we've talked about, well, I can't remember if we have talked about, but like the Dixie Chicks having to be renamed to the Chicks.
Yes.
Lady Antebellum being renamed. And so in the light of that, looking at some of these really well-known songs, it was a process for Dad and I to find the right songs because it was in a time where people, where everyone was really starting to take a lot more notice of the cultural and historical references and context of some of these songs. So the Sunday session sometimes took a little bit of finding the right song, and it was during COVID, so everyone was heightened to things. So we were really conscious of that. But that's a memory, and I'll always have those videos of him playing.
I remember those videos, and also there's something to be said about approaching social media with purpose, which I believe is what your father did. Nothing wrong with a YouTube rabbit hole of scrolling through videos from one to the next. But there's also a whole world out there of content that is there to help you learn and, that you can actually get skills from.
Exactly. And he was very much a self-taught person. He taught him, he went off to panel beating class. He restored a 1927 Dodge, 1927 or 1928 Dodge from the chassis up. He went and taught himself how to make lead light windows, how to make instruments. Like he was always thirsty and curious for knowledge and learning. And we talk as a family that if he had had a different starting point in life, really anything could have been possible for Dad. Because he did drop out of school early to join the bank, but he was always learning, going off to night school. He went and did, I remember he did a course at the CAE down here, which is a Council of Adult Education, on how to play a bluesgrass harmonica.
Wow.
He went to night school, so he was
It
always
is highly specific.
Sorry?
I like a highly specific class.
Mum and I were very curious about that class. because with it's but it was just we were curious as in who goes to learn the harmonica, but he was
Hmm.
just always curious and wanting to learn, and that music gave him so much joy,
Yes.
and community, because he started a band within his local church, which
Hmm.
then morphed into another band, which was named after a river near in Gippsland where he grew up. So, for him, music was a big thing, but also TV. Like, Dad probably wasn't as big a film person, although, I could name his two favorite movies, which would be Gladiator, which we absolutely, well, no, actually, a few. Babe. We had to ban him watching Babe in the house because he would cry because he was very sensitive.
Uh-huh.
And so he could recite Babe, but Shane. So a Western called Shane, which, we've still, I'll never be able to throw out the DVD, not the DVD, the VHS of Shane. We
Hmm.
never got into it. We never understood it, but we certainly knew the lines like "Come back, Shane." Those really. But so a few movies, but certainly it's TV. I remember that Dad loved those English comedies.
Right.
Are you with me?
I am absolutely, I'm just taking it all in because I'm learning things as well. And we've had many conversations about you. I mean, your dad's been a topic, you've told me stories about him ever since I've known you. So I'm still learning things. So
Yes.
sometimes you can just let the sentence end. And you know what? They've told
You
us
were
about
giving me space.
no, I am not. Yeah, but they've also told, they've taught us about the virtue of silence, that, when sometimes a sentence is
Exactly.
over, you don't necessarily have to jump in and put your 2 cents, and just, let that information be what it is.
That's
So,
right. Yes.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started in radio and people are so scared of this, any second of silence on the radio,
Exactly.
which
Yes.
actually I started doing radio work thanks to my mom, who was working in radio. So that's my biggest
I never
influence.
knew your mum worked in radio. I'm
And she
learning.
worked in community radio, and I used
Ah,
to go visit her at work. And one day, the lady that was managing the radio station said, "I need a voice to record some like an announcement or something." She was like, "Do you want to try?" I'm like, "Sure." And then that was that. And then, if I hadn't done that, um, I wouldn't have gone to Australia to study journalism at UTS, and I would never have volunteered at the Sydney Olympics, and I'd never, that's influence as well, right there.
yes. And I think I
Hmm.
can safely speak for both of us when I say we don't take for granted how lucky we have both been, um, with our parents and with the environment that our
Right.
childhoods and
Hmm.
the encouragement we got from our parents. I remember, at
Yes.
school. I mean, at uni, I did well in year 12, so our last year of school, I did drama, photography. While everyone else was sort of being pushed to do maths and science and those very serious subjects. Mum and Dad were very much like, do what you enjoy, because they knew that
Right.
I would get much better results if I actually did subjects I enjoyed.
Of
Um,
course.
and then at uni, I did, animation and film studies and, not the usual route. And once again, I think because Dad had a love of that and of marketing, they were both do what you enjoy. And I
Hmm.
would drag Dad to, weird ass dance performances that I had to go to give a review at uni, and he'd be like, "I'm the only one, I'm the oldest here." I remember dragging him to Donnie Darko because I needed to study it for my film class, and he had
Yeah.
just had no qualms in doing that, and Dad was very good because we could talk about the meaning of films and the meaning of the storyline and
Right.
dissect them, but I will never take for granted how lucky I've been, and
And
because it
that's
has been a
also.
very charmed life with these amazing parents and
Hmm.
influences, that I and not everyone is afforded that, so I certainly don't
Yeah.
I don't take it for granted. I'm not flippant
Yes.
about it.
Mm-hmm. And also, I feel it's important to say that everything that you're saying right now, it's not something that you discovered. You were well aware of all
Yes.
this every step of the way while your dad was still with us. Because
Yes.
sometimes, and that's why I also, our influences we don't notice when the person passes away. It's something that we carry every step of the way. And your mom's been a great influence on you as well. And
Oh, correct. Yes.
yeah.
Um, and I remember, so Dad used to drive me to school, and just for context, we sort of lived in the northeast of Melbourne. I went to school in the east. Dad worked in the west, but he would
Hmm.
drop me to school. So it was like, I mean, it probably added 40 minutes on his like over an hour drive to work. Like when I look
Right.
back, it could not have been more out of the way that he would drive me. But we loved it. And every morning we would listen to 3LO, which is ABC Radio. It's now called 774. And it's talk back, ABC Radio. So sort of like BBC talk back, I guess. And it would be very current affairs. So Dad and I would talk about current affairs, and we would, solve the world's problems and talk about politics, because Dad and I shared very strong passion for politics, which comes from his social justice
Hmm.
background. And we would always talk about how much we loved those mornings in the car, just Dad and I, shooting
Right.
breeze on the world events. And so even at the time we talked about how much we loved it. And for years, forever after, we would still talk about how much we enjoyed those mornings. So you're right, it was in the moment. I didn't take it for granted either. And
Right.
and Dad and I and Mum the same, and my sister, we can talk about how much we love memories, and we'll talk, and I got to say things to Dad before he passed away about what an amazing life he had given us. And in his
Hmm.
true style, he said, "Oh, well, your mother did half of it." I said, "Yeah, no, she did."
Yeah.
But you're right. It's telling people in those moments, and I
Hmm.
was thinking about during the hellhole of last year, where I kind of took solace, not took solace, where I could escape to, I guess. And it was two TV shows, and it was that
Yes.
I just like I would get home from the hospital, in tears, just in disbelief of what we were going through. Um, and uh, and the two shows, one was the royal family. So the
Hmm.
Caroline, and I talked about Caroline Aherne in one of our podcasts last year. That was made by Granada Television's comedy department, and when I worked in London, that was the show they were making when I was at the comedy department. And it's a family. It's just set basically in their living room in Manchester.
Right.
Um, and Gavin and Stacey was the other one.
Hmm.
And when
Yeah.
I think back, they're two shows where family is it's all about family.
Of
And
course.
they were the shows that they were my safe space to go to. And
Uh-huh.
I just watched those episodes on repeat last year for 3 months.
Hmm.
Mm,
I mean, there's something to, I mean, I keep saying there's something to be said about, but um, yeah, those friendly environments that that you can
yes.
go back to, it may be fiction, but it's something comforting and easy and that you can settle into and let yourself be.
Exactly. And I was watching. Came up something, might have been on LinkedIn or Instagram, actually about the science of why we go back to those trusted shows and what our brain can take on and what it can't take on, and why those familiar things are so important during
Hmm.
those times of stress. So there is data behind it.
I'm sure there is. And you know what? I've been asking myself, going through some hardships in the past few months, why I ended up listening to the music that I ended up listening
Mm,
to. Kind of like I need to kind of just check my brain at the door and just put on some
mm,
music, and I'm alone, and it's just the music and myself.
yes.
And um that's also, I mean, that's how I warmed up to Taylor Swift's music in the past few weeks and months, and it's been an
Mm.
ongoing conversation topic between us. But that's what I've been listening to, the
Yeah,
Tortured Poets Department, in the
yeah.
past few weeks, and it just sprung on me out of nowhere that I was feeling comfortable in this space that album created for me.
I'd like to do an episode on that actually, of why something that we had not been on board with, you with Taylor Swift. I'm going to say me with Andy Murray.
Yes.
I never understood Andy Murray, and then I saw him in a comic relief
Mm-hmm.
skit, and suddenly have been the world's biggest Andy Murray fan since. And I know we are going to do a Jump the Shark episode, and I want to do a
Yes.
kind of a reverse of Jump the Shark, of when you suddenly got on board with something that you just had not been on board with. Um,
Right.
but it's you bring up a really interesting point, because I think there's, well, obviously the fact that you're finally on board and have seen the light with Tay Tay, and just welcome to the good side is what I'd like to say. But it
Mm-hmm.
is how we take in things depending on our moment in time. Um,
Yeah.
and so there was a show called, well, it was in the 80s, I think, or early 90s in Australia, and then they did a remake recently called Mother and Son. And it was about,
Yes.
it had Ruth Cracknell and Gary McDonald in, and it was about a son living with his mum who had Alzheimer's. And we all, we grew up on the show, we loved it, my nan loved it. But we did always say, would we be able to watch this if we were experiencing someone with Alzheimer's or dementia? Of
Yeah.
course, we have now been through that road of a loved one having Alzheimer's and
Mm-hmm.
dementia. And there's no way I would be able to watch that show. Like, it would
Mm-hmm.
be far too close. So it is, I've always thought it's really interesting of what you can take on because of where you are in life.
Of
And
course.
during lockdown, and COVID, my book club, there were books that I remember we read a book called Pants on Fire. It was called Pants on Fire. And all the reviews, from really well-known people were like, this is the funniest book we've ever read, and all of this. We hated it. And we
Mm-hmm.
said, is it because of we're in lockdown, like our whole world is turned upside down? I'd be very interested to read the book now and see
Mm-hmm.
if I did find it funny. So I think it's really interesting how those moments in time and what we're going through also change the way we digest a piece of pop culture. That is not different. It's the pop culture hasn't changed. We've changed,
Right.
and
And it's
then
also, yeah.
how our lens changes,
Mm.
how
And
we
it's
take it
also,
in.
I think it's also about tuning some of the stuff out. And for me,
Mm,
it was more just me and the music. And
mm.
I was alone at home because I had to deal with all this stuff on my own. And it was literally just me and the music. And I thought to myself, if there's a moment where you'll be able to take it in, now's the time,
Yes,
And I've done that with different records over the course of those few weeks. And I've done that with a few different artists and different records. And, you know, some worked, some didn't work out so much. It's something quite difficult to, I mean, we don't need to understand it. It's just
we
what
don't.
speaks to us in the moment.
Exactly.
We're in the business of analyzing things and analyzing discourse and everything. But when it comes down to feeling, it's sometimes that's all you need to remember. You don't need to
Exactly.
remember the specifics or put words on. And that's
Yes.
something I learned um, from seeing a psychologist in the past few months in the States, if there's a place that you can do that, because it's so, in France, it's still not something that you talk about at a dinner
Mm.
table. But in the
Yes.
United States, everybody has a dog, everybody has a shrink. And so, it was that moment of, you leave those sessions and you don't remember what you said. You just leave with a
Yes.
feeling. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
for people who are so focused on communicating and remembering and everything needs to be precise and organized. Sometimes you just need to throw it out the window.
You do. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, well, I'm just conscious of time. We have
Yes.
rambled on, and
Uh-huh.
I would like to thank the listeners for indulging me in making this a bit of a tribute to Desmond George Stayches. And I'm sure he's listening somewhere. Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Ham Radio, Mr. Early Adopter of YouTube, Mr. Living Life to the Full, and his love of media. And we used to always tease him because he worked in marketing in the bank. And he might have worked, look, who knows, he could have worked in the marketing department for 5 years or a hot minute. I'm not really sure. But he'd always
Mm-hmm.
say, when I was in marketing, and we'd always go, oh God, here we go. And we'd always tease him. But he was spot on. He understood trends. He understood marketing. He had this creativity, which I'm so blessed that he has passed down. Um,
Yes.
and and he was very handy. He'd make things. So
Hmm.
lead light windows, and cars, chopping boards, whatever it was. He always had a project, and I think it's a shame I didn't get to do a podcast with him,
Hmm.
because I think we would have had some laughs. We would have annoyed each other too because we were too similar, two Leos
Hmm.
who with
They're the best
birthday.
conversations, though.
Exactly. Birthdays 6 days apart. And, he
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
like all the pop culture we loved, but we certainly liked a lot that he loved. And, in his later years, we found the shows that he gravitated towards were very visual, which
Hmm.
completely made sense knowing the changes, that were happening in his brain. So he loved MasterChef, absolutely loved it. And he
Yep.
loved the stories behind the people in MasterChef. And he loved MasterChef because the judges weren't mean. He was
Yes.
very, and Dad was a very, there was a kindness in this, as I said, this social justice sort of thing. So, he wasn't into shows where they'd cut them down. So he
Hmm.
loved MasterChef and he loved the judges because they'd build them up. And, whenever I'd speak to him, he'd tell me about the latest episode and, the story and what the judges said and things. And he loved The Masked Singer. Now, he
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
necessarily know anyone under the mask. We'd have to sort of try and remind him. But it was the visual of it that I
Hmm.
realized he loved. And so we'd always, joke, take it off, and they'd do the reveal and take the mask off.
Yep.
Um, and he absolutely loved that show, which was so bonkers. But I think it was the music, but it was the visual of it,
Hmm.
that gave Dad a place, that he could enjoy these shows. Whereas something like Vera, which Mum and I love, or Midsummer Murders,
Hmm.
he couldn't tune in as much to those. But those
Hmm.
visual shows, and as I said, those shows where the judges were kind and the
That's right.
feedback was kind, he absolutely loved. So whenever I see The Masked Singer or MasterChef, and Mum still watches MasterChef, I just think of Dad.
I mean, feel good television all the way.
Oh,
Sometimes we put ourselves in situations watching some dark, material and content, and sometimes you just want to move away from that.
exactly. Well, we had that
Hmm.
conversation last year when I was full on into Succession, or the year before.
I
And
still haven't
you,
seen a single episode.
yeah, and I understand why. Like, it's too
Yeah.
much.
No, it is too much.
Mm,
Yes, yes.
mm,
There's one show that got me through the past few months when things were getting a
mm.
little difficult, is Elsbeth. I don't know.
Ah,
So I love Elsbeth Tassioni, and what I
yes,
did, because I haven't been watching television so much in the past few months, but I went back to The Good Wife and I went back to The
ah,
Good Fight. So
yes,
the
yes,
show, Elsbeth originated on The
yes.
Good Fight, and then she appeared on The Good Fight, which was the spin-off. And I sat over a weekend and watched, I think she was in 17 episodes or something of
Yes,
both shows combined. And I watched every single episode that Elsbeth had appeared in before she actually got her own show. And so it was yeah, it's a fond memory of because she's such a fun character. So
yes.
yeah, she's different. So
I had
really,
no idea. So Elspeth is on here, but I had no idea she came from those shows.
no, yeah, she appeared on the good. Yeah, she won an Emmy Award for one of the episodes that she
Is
did.
that
Yes,
right?
on The Good Wife. That's right. And then she was on The Good Fight for a few more. And she keeps. I mean, she's such a cool character. So yeah,
Mm,
it's been fun seeing that character kind of develop from one. I mean,
yeah,
she appeared like in one episode a year. So
yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
that was
There
that
we
story
go.
there.
Well, it's probably time to wrap up our first
Yes,
episode back. And really, as we say, this was a bit of an explanation of why we came to a sudden halt last year,
that's right.
but a tribute to my dad, Des, and a tribute to your father-in-law and
Hmm.
those very dear people. I mean, that sounds like I'm saying it lightly, but those people who are such influences in our lives.
And
And
other people's lives as well,
other
not
people's
just
lives,
ours.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah,
correct. Yes,
that
yeah.
is Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel that that's also something worth mentioning, and also I feel that through all these stories that we shared today, there's
Mm,
also kind of woven into these stories are a lot of the topics that we talk about all the time.
that's
And
right. Yes.
and also it's important to I come from a culture where when someone passes, everything is so codified,
Mm,
and we can be lost for words and we can be completely frozen by, what to do and how to react and how to carry on. Um, but at the same time, we need to also talk about these things in a forum such as ours, which is,
exactly.
you know, uh, mentioning life as we know it. And this is a huge part of life as well.
Yes. Yep.
Hmm.
And we did say we were going to keep this episode to 45 minutes. We have not done
Yeah.
that.
I mean, we'll keep the
But
other ones at 45.
exactly. As we wrap up, we used to do what we've liked of what we've seen, and I'm going to do a
Yes.
question without notice. So this could be anything that you have seen from when we recorded our last episode.
Well, the one thing that I was thinking about is that, I was talking about getting rid of the noise when you want to do something and a lot of I stay away from so much because it's not that I don't like it, it's that I don't like the noise around it. And while no one was paying attention, Pink went in and her latest tour, world tour, became the third highest grossing tour in history. Only, I mean, only third to the Eras Tour, Taylor
Mm.
Swift, and Beyonce's Renaissance. So no one was paying attention. There's no noise around Pink. She's just doing her thing. She's been doing her thing for more than 20 years now. And I feel that that was an incredible kind of powerful thing that no one talked about, Be
Yes.
or very few people talked about.
No,
So
you're
that's been,
absolutely right. She did an arena tour here. I mean, Pink has set records in Australia for her concerts.
yes,
We were big on the Pink train before America kind of got on
right.
as much.
Absolutely.
And you're right. And I've seen Pink in concert. She is unbelievable. But you are absolutely right. There is she just does not get the credit she deserves. And we've
Hmm.
been talking about the little clips of Dunice that we keep getting on Instagram.
Right.
And the sort of the take on the SNL Dunice skits, which is editing clips of Taylor, Beyonce, Sabrina Carpenter, Lady Gaga, whoever it be, in concert, and then cut to Katy Perry in concert as the
Hmm.
contrast. But Pink should actually be in those montages.
Right. She should
Maybe we could
absolutely
do an
be in.
episode why Pink has not got the gravitas she should have.
I'm down for a Pink episode. I mean, we've mentioned Pink in the Feud episode. I mean,
Yeah.
we've mentioned her
Yeah,
along the way.
I think we could do a Pink episode.
We could
Yes.
do a Pink episode and try. I saw a very good documentary actually about Pink the other day, and they
Ah.
were explaining a lot about her, and they were talking about, I mean, they were talking to her teachers from high school and everything.
Mm.
So, um, I think she enjoys not being part of that noise.
Possibly,
You
possibly.
know,
Yes,
I
yes.
um I think she does.
Yeah.
What about
Oh, I
you?
like that. Thank
Is
you.
is the, yeah, is there a moment or something that from
Yes,
since
there
last
is.
season?
Very random moment. But
Yes.
I have returned to the fold of the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I am not a Real Housewives franchise person. I did have a hot minute being a big fan of New Jersey.
Yep.
New Jersey, yes. But I have been out of the loop for some time because there's a lot of fighting and I find it exhausting. But that is one show I have gone back to, and I absolutely love Jennifer Tilly in it. And of course, I mean, anyone who watches or reads about the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills will know how great Jennifer Tilly is because she doesn't get involved. She's random. She doesn't get
Yes,
involved in the bullshit. But I have always been very curious about her lifestyle because she has a lot of money
she
and
does.
even in Beverly Hills, Stayches. She seems to have a lot of money.
I mean,
Um,
we're saying she does, but did we even know she had that much money
yes,
before she
she
showed
does,
up
and
on the Real
that's what
Housewives
I'm
of
getting
Beverly
to.
Hills?
That's what I'm
Right.
getting to. Yes.
Oh,
So
sorry.
she has a lot of money, and she's always in designer labels, and she's been nominated for an Oscar, I think. I
Yes.
think her and her sister are the only two sisters, other than maybe there's another group of sisters, the only siblings who've both been nominated for
Joan
Oscars.
Fontaine and someone and her sister, I
Yeah, I
think.
can't remember. Anyway, so Jennifer is sort of a guest star in Real Housewives of Beverly Hills because she's friends with one of the cast members. But she sort of sits on the edges, a bit like Kathy Hilton, and doesn't get involved in the crap, and just is a straight talker, and just seems to be the most. She's the most relatable, but she's also not the most relatable because her lifestyle's so crazy. And she's always got
Absolutely.
custom made Louis Vuitton bags and custom made, Chanel necklaces. Anyway, so I've always been very curious because she doesn't seem to be doing a lot of acting. Where does she have all this money from?
Right.
I've thought to myself. So, cut to an episode. There's obviously two cast members who are going through separation, being Dorit and Kyle, and then obviously a cast member who's been through it, which is Erica J. So there's a lot of talk about divorce settlements. And there's a scene where they're in St. Lucia or somewhere, and they're sitting on the beach, and they're
Yep.
talking about you need to, even though you think you're having an amicable split with your partner, you need to get a lawyer in. And Jennifer just casually drops that when she split from her husband, Sam Simon, who she remained very close with, and I think he went through a cancer battle and passed away after that divorce, but I think she pretty much nursed him through it, so they stayed really close.
Right.
He said, when I was going through the divorce settlement with him, we were just going to do 50-50 of the money that we had. And someone said, you need to get a divorce lawyer. And she said, and so that's why I get proceeds from The Simpsons. So Sam
Yeah.
Simon being a co-creator of The Simpsons. So she gets something like 25% cut of everything to do with The Simpsons. And
Right.
the look on one of the housewives, I think it's Kyle's, like, The Simpsons, and she jokes and she goes, "Yeah, where do you think I get this money from?"
Right.
Who knew? And but it's such a tiny part of the episode. And just to see the look on the other housewife's face, and then to sort of her joke, well, where do you think I'm getting this lifestyle from?
Yeah.
Obviously, she's very talented. I'm not saying she's riding on his coattails because she's very talented. But I just found that it's such a cute little moment of a tiny little reveal, in a very
Yes.
not a big moment in the
I
episode.
mean, that was an interesting season. I'll give you that. I knew from the first episode that Dorit would be sitting right next to Andy during the reunion. I mean, you knew
We
that
could do a
something.
whole episode on the reunion on
Yeah.
Garcelle
Uh-huh.
walking out, not wanting the photo. I have very strong views. We've talked about this before. I have very strong views on the manufacturing of disputes and fights and the
Hmm.
portrayal of women in these housewives franchises as shrill and screaming and bitchy, and it plays into this whole stereotype of women. So I have, and it's orchestrated by men like Andy Cohen and Bravo. So I have
Hmm.
some very strong feelings, and I had very strong feelings against myself when I went back into watching Real Housewives. And we've talked about also the game playing of, depending on, there's certainly a lot of talk of Kyle is very close to the producers, so she gets different treatment to other housewives in the reunions and in
Right.
the edits and things like that. So
Uh-huh.
I have very strong feelings. I have very mixed feelings that I ended up going back and watching it this season. But I think we could do a whole episode on that because there's certainly um, there's a lot of commentary on Andy Cohen and the power and the sort of marionette of, and these
Yes.
are people's lives, but it does
Yeah.
play into this stereotype of women that I just hate, which serves a purpose for some people.
I still wish we could have reunions like they do in real life and kind of have a moderator and just dress up and kind of argue with people you have issues with. If I could
I'll be
make it
Jennifer Tilly just sitting there eating.
right, yeah, no, that would be absolutely amazing. I love the format
I
of the
think you could
reunion.
be Kathy Hilton and I could be Jennifer Tilly.
I don't know who I'd want to be from that bunch. I want them to bring back. I mean, I don't think that'll ever happen, but I want Eileen Davidson to come back. I loved her so much.
Who was that?
Eileen Davidson? Yeah.
Oh, yes. From Young
Yeah.
and the Restless.
Yes. And
Yes.
the Bold and the Beautiful.
Did she
Yeah.
do that? Well, there we
Yeah,
go.
she won an Emmy for both of those
I
shows.
did not know that.
She has 2 Emmys. Yeah.
Well, on that
Uh,
note, we should wrap this up.
yes. Anything else we want to say?
No,
Oh,
other than we're back and we
yeah,
have
we're back.
some good
And I
episodes planned.
and I would like to announce that I will be retiring the Tina Arena jar and introducing the Danny Minogue jar for season 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a lot to discuss on both those two.
Yes, we
Uh,
do.
and
Coming up.
coming up. Well, from Melbourne, Australia, I bid you good day.
And from Clermont-Ferrand, France, I bid you good night.
Until the next time.
Bye.
This has been Drop It Like It's Pop.
Be sure to follow us on our Instagram page at Drop Like It's Pop to have access to our latest episodes and playlists.
Until next time.